In the winter of 1954, a mother in Ohio stood at her kitchen counter in a worn apron, staring at nearly empty shelves. Payday was 4 days away. She had crackers. She had a can of soup. She had 6 hungry children who would be walking through that door at 5 o'clock. So she did what millions of American mothers did that decade. She made it work. In thousands of small kitchens just like hers, linoleum floors, single bulb overhead light, a radio playing softly from the windowsill, women were pulling casseroles out of chipped enamel baking dishes and feeding entire families for less than 50 cents a meal. Today we're going back to 15 of those dishes. One of them fed 8 people using nothing but crackers, canned soup, and whatever was left in the icebox. Another became so common in church basements across the Midwest that entire congregations could smell it from the parking lot. And one, the simplest one on this list, was made entirely without meat. Children begged for seconds anyway. They didn't know these meals were built from almost nothing. They just thought it was their favorite supper. Most of these recipes never appeared in a single cookbook. They lived on grease-stained index cards tucked into kitchen drawers, passed from exhausted mothers to daughters standing beside them at the stove, learning without knowing they were learning. Number 1. Cracker Casserole. In 1952, a box of saltine crackers cost 9 cents. 9 cents. And one tired mother in Indiana turned that 9-cent box into supper for 5 people. No meat. No fuss. Just crackers, a white sauce, canned peas, and 30 years of kitchen instinct. She pressed the crackers into the bottom of a greased baking dish, poured the sauce over, layered more crackers across the top, slid it into a 350-degree oven, and went back to folding laundry. 25 minutes later, the kitchen smelled like warmth itself. The top had gone golden and brittle. The edges bubbled slow. The inside pulled together into something soft and savory that no boxed mix has ever come close to. Here's what nobody talks about. Those crackers weren't just filling space. As the sauce soaked through, the starch released slowly, binding everything into a texture that was somehow both crispy and tender at once. No chemistry degree required. Just experience passed down at a stove. The whole dish cost under 30 cents. Children who claimed to hate peas cleaned their plates without a word. By the 1960s, television commercials had convinced Americans that opening a box counted as cooking. Dishes like this quietly disappeared. The index cards got lost. The daughters moved to the suburbs and bought frozen dinners. The crackers are still on the shelf. The knowledge is the part that got expensive to lose. Number 2. Tater Tot Casserole. Nobody invented Tater Tot Casserole. It just appeared. Sometime in the late 1950s, in thousands of small kitchens across the Midwest, mothers discovered that a bag of frozen tater tots, a pound of ground beef, and a can of cream of mushroom soup could become something that stopped a family cold at the dinner table. She browned the beef first. Onions cooked down soft and translucent in the same pan, soaking up every bit of flavor the meat left behind. Then the soup, straight from the can, no water, stirred in thick and slow. The whole mixture poured into a baking dish. Then the tots, arranged across the top in careful rows. Like she was doing something important. Because she was. Into the oven at 375 degrees. 30 minutes later, those tots had gone crispy on the outside, creamy underneath, soaking up the savory beef and mushroom sauce rising beneath them. The edges were dark and bubbling. The smell alone brought children running from 2 rooms away. The whole dish cost under 60 cents. It fed 6. Here's what made it genius. The tots formed a crust that sealed in all the moisture below. Every bite had crunch on top, tenderness underneath. Texture contrast that professional chefs charge $40 a plate to recreate. Grandmothers did it with a frozen bag and a soup can. Today people pay restaurant prices for deconstructed versions of this exact dish. They just forgot where it came from. Number 3. Chicken and rice casserole. There are meals that feed a family. And then there are meals that hold a family together. In the 1950s, chicken and rice casserole was both. A whole chicken cost less than $1. A cup of long-grain rice cost almost nothing. And on cold Wednesday evenings in small post-war homes, that combination went into a baking dish and came out of the oven as something that felt like a hug from the inside. The method was almost too simple to believe. Raw rice spread across the bottom of the dish. Chicken pieces laid directly on top, skin on, bone in, the way chicken was meant to be cooked. 1 can of cream of mushroom soup thinned with a single cup of water poured slowly over everything. Salt. Pepper. A pinch of garlic if there was any. Covered tight with foil. Into a 325-degree oven. For 90 minutes, that dish sat undisturbed. And here's what happened inside. The rice slowly absorbed every drop of liquid, the soup, the water, the fat rendering down from the chicken skin. It swelled and softened and took on a depth of flavor that plain boiled rice never gets close to. The chicken turned tender enough to fall from the bone without a knife. The top went golden and faintly crisp where the foil lifted at the edges. 1 pan. No stirring. No watching. Dinner made itself while the mother helped with homework at the kitchen table. That was the real genius nobody ever mentioned. These casseroles gave exhausted women back something precious. Time. By the 1970s, rotisserie chicken and instant rice replaced this entirely. Faster, yes. Cheaper sometimes. But the house never smelled the same. And the rice never tasted like anything at all. Number 4. Shipwreck Casserole. Nobody planned this dish. That was exactly the point. It was Wednesday. Or Thursday. The week had gone longer than the money. The refrigerator had that specific emptiness that every mother in 1950s America recognized. Not completely bare, but close enough to feel the pressure of 6 o'clock approaching like a deadline. So she opened every cabinet, took out everything, and started layering. Raw potatoes first, sliced thin and pressed flat against the bottom of the dish like she was laying a floor. Ground beef scattered across them without ceremony. A handful of rice, dry, uncooked, spread straight from the bag. 1 can of tomatoes. 1 can of kidney beans. Whatever else was left. No browning. No pre-cooking. No technique. Just faith in the oven. She covered it tight with foil, slid it onto the rack, set the temperature to 350 degrees, and walked away. 90 minutes later something close to miraculous had happened inside that dish. The raw rice had swelled and absorbed the tomato liquid completely. The beef had rendered its fat down through every layer. The potatoes at the bottom had become something almost silky, soaked through with everything above them, completely transformed from the firm raw slices she had placed there an hour and a half ago. 1 pot. 0 technique. 90 minutes. And it tasted like intention. Like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Do you know what the most extraordinary thing about Shipwreck Casserole was? It was different every single time. Different family. Different cupboard. Different cans. The dish had no fixed identity, no correct version, no wrong answer. It simply became whatever the week had left behind. Poverty made it flexible. Flexibility made it genius. That same adaptability costs $40 at a farm-to-table restaurant today. Your grandmother figured it out on a Wednesday, with whatever was left in the cabinet. Number 5. Chicken and biscuit bake. Some dishes were built to survive hard times. This one was built to make hard times feel like a celebration. Chicken and biscuit bake was the casserole that appeared on the table when something good had happened, or when a mother decided her family deserved to feel like something good had. A thin week dressed up as a feast. Budget food that somehow tasted like Sunday. She started with leftover chicken. Whatever was still on the bones from the night before, pulled apart with 2 forks into rough, generous pieces. Folded into a thick cream sauce, butter, flour, milk, a handful of frozen peas and carrots, seasoned until the whole mixture smelled like something from a much more expensive kitchen. Poured into a deep baking dish. Then came the biscuits. Dropped by the spoonful across the top. Not rolled. Not perfect. Just soft rounds of dough placed with practiced confidence across the surface of that creamy filling, close enough to touch at the edges. into a 400-degree oven. 20 minutes later, the biscuits had puffed and browned on top while their undersides had soaked into the filling below, soft and tender and rich with everything underneath them. The cream sauce bubbled up between them in slow, lazy pools. The kitchen smelled like a church potluck and a grandmother's Sunday all at once. The whole dish cost under 70 cents. Here's what made it work. Those dropped biscuits didn't just sit on top. They created a seal, trapping the steam from the filling below, cooking from both sides simultaneously. The tops stayed golden and proud. The bottoms became something closer to dumplings. 2 textures. 1 dish. No accident. Women who never read a food science textbook understood this instinctively. They'd learned it standing beside their own mothers. Today the freezer aisle sells a version of this in a cardboard box. Pre-made biscuits. Pre-seasoned filling. Microwave for 4 minutes. It doesn't bubble. It doesn't brown. And it doesn't smell like anything worth remembering. Number 6. Cabbage Roll Casserole. Cabbage rolls took 2 hours to make. This took 45 minutes. And it tasted almost exactly the same. Somewhere in the 1950s, in the Eastern European immigrant communities spread across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, exhausted mothers made a quiet compromise. The flavors their grandmothers had carried from the old country, beef, rice, tomato, sweet softened cabbage, all of it preserved. The painstaking rolling and tucking and layering? Gone. Just the soul of the dish. None of the ceremony. She browned the ground beef with onions until the kitchen smelled like the beginning of something good. Chopped cabbage went into the same pan, a whole head, roughly cut, piled high, wilting down in the beef fat until it turned soft and sweet and almost unrecognizable from the raw vegetable it had been minutes before. Uncooked rice stirred through. Canned tomatoes poured over. Salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar to balance the acid. Everything into a deep baking dish. Covered tight with foil. Into a 350-degree oven for an hour. When the foil came off, the rice had absorbed every drop of liquid in the dish. The cabbage had melted into the beef and tomato until the whole thing was deeply savory and unified, one flavor built from many. The edges had caramelized slightly where the tomato touched the hot pan. A full head of cabbage cost 9 cents in 1955. The whole casserole fed 8 people. 8. Here's what those immigrant grandmothers understood that modern cooks forgot. Cabbage is not a peasant ingredient. It is a genius ingredient. It releases liquid slowly as it cooks, essentially basting everything around it. It adds sweetness. It adds body. It makes a small amount of meat feed twice as many people without anyone feeling shortchanged. They knew this because they had to know it. Necessity sharpened them into better cooks than any culinary school could. Today cabbage sits largely ignored in the produce aisle, passed over for trendy greens that cost 4 times as much and disappear in the pan. Meanwhile, a dish that fed 8 people for under 40 cents has been quietly forgotten. The cabbage is still 9 cents a pound. The wisdom walked out the door with the grandmothers. Number 7. Macaroni and Cheese Casserole. Forget the blue box. That came later. That came from a boardroom, not a kitchen. The real macaroni and cheese, the one that existed long before any corporation got involved, required a hot oven, a proper sauce, and hands that knew what they were doing. She boiled the macaroni just shy of done, because it would finish in the oven. She knew that. Had always known that. Butter melted in a heavy pan. Flour stirred in until golden and fragrant. Milk added slowly until the sauce thickened into something smooth and impossibly good smelling. Sharp cheddar folded in handful by handful until it turned deep gold and glossy. Macaroni and sauce combined. Poured into a buttered dish. More cheese across the top. Crushed crackers pressed over everything. Small pats of butter placed like careful promises. Into a 375-degree oven. 30 minutes later the top was deeply browned and crackling. The edges pulled away dark and crispy. Underneath, molten, sharp, and possibly rich. A pound of cheddar cost 30 cents in 1953. This fed 6 people. Here's what the blue box never understood. Baking concentrates the cheese flavor. The top loses moisture and browns into something almost brittle, while the inside stays soft and creamy. 2 textures. 1 dish. No accident. In 1937, Kraft introduced their boxed version. 14 cents. 9 minutes. They called it Progress. Millions of families bought it. And slowly, without anyone deciding it, the real version disappeared from weeknight tables. The blue box won on convenience. It never won on taste. Number 8. Ground beef and potato layer bake. Do you remember the smell of potatoes baking in a hot oven? That specific earthy, comforting smell that meant dinner was almost ready and everything was going to be fine. Now add brown beef. Melted onions. A savory gravy bubbling up through the cracks. That was this dish. She sliced the potatoes thin and consistent, because even thickness meant even cooking, and she knew that without being taught. Laid them across the bottom of a greased baking dish. Ground beef browned with onions went on next. Another layer of potatoes. Then beef again. Built up carefully like something architectural. A thin gravy poured over the top. Beef stock, a little flour, a splash of Worcestershire. Covered tight. Into a 350-degree oven for an hour. Here's what made it brilliant. Potatoes absorb fat as they cook. Every drop of flavor the beef released soaked directly into those thin slices, layer by layer, until the potatoes tasted like they'd been braising in rich stock for hours. Because they had. The whole dish cost under 50 cents in 1955. When was the last time you ate something that took that much care and cost that little? Modern frozen skillet meals sell the same combination for $4 a serving. Cooked in a factory. Portioned by a machine. Your grandmother built it from scratch. And when she set it on that table, still bubbling, still crackling at the edges, nobody looked away. They just picked up their forks. Number 9. Cheesy potato casserole. Can you think of a single person who doesn't love a potato covered in melted cheese? Neither could any mother in 1950s America. This was the casserole that showed up everywhere. Church potlucks. Funeral receptions. Thin-budget Wednesdays. The dish that made a table feel generous when generosity wasn't easy. It never failed. Potatoes peeled and sliced thin. Layered into a buttered dish with onions pressed between each layer like quiet punctuation. Cream of mushroom soup thinned with milk. Sharp cheddar stirred through until thick and golden. Poured slowly over every crack and crevice. Then more cheese across the top. Because some things are worth doing twice. Into a 350-degree oven for an hour and 15 minutes. Have you ever watched cheese brown in a hot oven? The way it bubbles first at the edges, turning from pale yellow to deep amber in slow, irreversible stages until the whole surface looks almost lacquered. That was the top of this casserole. Underneath, those thin potato slices had absorbed every drop of cream and cheese into something tender and unified and deeply savory. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost 19 cents in 1953. Do you know what this dish costs at a steakhouse today? $11. As a side. Your grandmother served it as the main event. To 8 people. 4 under 50 cents. And when she set that bubbling, golden dish on the table, nobody asked what else was for dinner. Number 10. Hamburger and corn casserole. Have you ever noticed how the simplest combinations are almost always the best ones? Beef and corn. 2 ingredients that have fed American families since before anyone was keeping track. She browned the ground beef first. Onions and green pepper cooked down soft in the same pan. Then creamed corn stirred through. Not whole kernel, creamed, because creamed corn dissolved into the beef like a sauce. Adding sweetness. Adding body. Making the whole thing taste far more complex than 40 cents had any right to produce. Egg noodles folded in. Tomato soup poured across the top. A handful of shredded cheese if there was any left. Into a 350-degree oven for 35 minutes. The cheese browned into a crust that crackled when the spoon broke through. Underneath, noodles and beef and corn pulled together into something deeply savory and unified. Here's what most people never think about. Creamed corn is a natural thickener. The starch from the broken kernels bound the entire casserole together as it baked. No cornstarch needed. No packet from a box. The ingredient itself did the work. These women understood their ingredients the way craftsmen understand their tools. Not from reading. From years of paying close attention at a hot stove. Today that knowledge comes in a seasoning packet. It used to come from experience. And experience, it turns out, tasted a whole lot better. Number 11. Hot dog and bean bake. Don't laugh. Because in 1953, this dish fed more American families than any fancy casserole ever did. Hot dog and bean bake was the bottom of the week meal. The Thursday night dish. The one that appeared when the ground beef was gone, the pantry was nearly bare, and payday was still one long day away. And somehow, children loved it anyway. She sliced the hot dogs first. Thin coins dropped into a greased baking dish alongside 2 cans of pork and beans. Brown sugar stirred through, just a spoonful, with a squeeze of mustard and a splash of ketchup. Onion diced fine and scattered over the top like she was finishing something that deserved care. Because it did. Into a 350-degree oven for 40 minutes. What came out was something unexpected. The beans had thickened and darkened around the edges into a deep, molasses-sweet sauce. The hot dog slices had plumped and split slightly, their edges caramelizing in the heat. The whole dish had pulled together into something smoky and sweet and savory all at once. It smelled like a backyard barbecue in a baking dish. A pack of hot dogs cost 29 cents. 2 cans of beans cost 18 cents total. The whole supper cost under 50 cents and left nobody hungry. Here's what made it work. Beans are pure protein and complex carbohydrate. Hot dogs provided fat and salt. The brown sugar caramelized in the oven heat, creating a sauce with genuine depth. It wasn't accidental. It was instinctive chemistry from women who had learned to make cheap ingredients behave like expensive ones. Today this combination gets dismissed as poor people food. But the families who ate it on cold Thursday nights in 1953 didn't feel poor. They felt fed. And sometimes, that's the whole point. Number 12. Spam and rice casserole. Go ahead and smile. But don't dismiss it yet. Because in the years following World War II, spam wasn't a punchline. It was a lifeline. It sat in pantries from Maine to California as something reliable. Something that didn't spoil. Something that was always there on the hard weeks when everything else had run out. And in the right hands, it became supper. She diced the spam first. Small cubes browned in a dry pan until the edges turned golden and slightly crisp, releasing a smoky, salty aroma that filled the kitchen instantly. Rice cooked separately and folded through. Cream of mushroom soup thinned with milk poured over everything. Frozen peas stirred in at the last moment, still cold, still bright green, balancing the richness around them. Into a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes. The top browned slowly. The sauce tightened around every grain of rice. The spam cubes held their edges, slightly crispy on the outside, tender within, distributed through the casserole like small pockets of smoky flavor. A can of spam cost 35 cents in 1955. This fed 5 people comfortably. Here's what nobody mentions. Spam is shelf-stable cooked pork shoulder. Browned properly in a hot pan, it develops genuine caramelization, the same Maillard reaction that makes expensive cuts of meat taste extraordinary. These women were unlocking real flavor chemistry from a 35-cent can. They just didn't have a name for what they were doing. Today's spam gets mocked by people who have never browned it properly in a hot pan. Never tasted what heat and patience can pull from something dismissed as cheap. Your grandmother knew something they don't. She knew that almost any ingredient, treated with enough care and attention, can feed a family with dignity. The can is still on the shelf. The technique is what got lost. Number 13. Tomato and rice bake. Sometimes the simplest dishes carry the most weight. No meat. No cheese. No cream soup. Just tomatoes, rice, onion, and an oven set to 350 degrees. And yet, in church basements and farmhouse kitchens and small post-war homes across the American South and Midwest, this dish appeared on tables week after week. Quietly. Reliably. Without apology. Because it worked. She started with canned tomatoes. Crushed by hand directly into a greased baking dish, the juice running red and fragrant between her fingers. Uncooked rice stirred through. Onion diced fine. Green pepper if there was one. A spoonful of sugar to balance the acid. Salt, pepper, a pinch of dried basil if the little tin hadn't run out yet. A cup of water poured over everything. Covered tight with foil. Into the oven. 45 minutes later the rice had absorbed every drop of liquid in that dish. Every drop of tomato juice. Every bit of onion sweetness. Every whisper of pepper and basil. The top had gone slightly crisp where the foil lifted at the corners. The edges were dark and caramelized and extraordinary. 2 cans of tomatoes cost 16 cents in 1954. A cup of rice cost almost nothing. This fed 6 people for under 25 cents total. Do you understand what that means? Here's what made it quietly brilliant. Tomatoes are naturally acidic. As they baked, that acid slowly broke down the starch in the rice, creating a texture that was simultaneously firm and yielding. Almost risotto-like. Without a single stir. Without standing over a hot stove for 40 minutes. The oven did the work. These women understood patience in a way modern cooking completely abandoned. They knew that low heat and time could transform the most basic ingredients into something with genuine depth and character. Today we reach for the boxed rice pilaf. The flavored instant packet. Ready in 90 seconds. It tastes like 90 seconds. This tasted like someone cared enough to wait. And on a cold evening in 1954, with 6 hungry people sitting around a linoleum table, that patience tasted like everything. Number 14. Salmon and noodle bake. Can you remember a time when fish on a Friday wasn't a restaurant decision? It was a kitchen ritual. Every Friday during Lent, and in many Catholic households, every Friday of the year, meat disappeared from the table. And in its place, something else appeared. Something that required creativity and care and the willingness to turn a humble can of salmon into a meal that nobody complained about. This was that meal. She opened the salmon first. Pink and soft, packed in its own liquid, nothing wasted, liquid included, poured directly into the mixing bowl. Egg noodles cooked just shy of tender. Cream of celery soup stirred through with a splash of milk until everything turned silky and pale and faintly oceanic. Frozen peas folded in. Salt. Pepper. A squeeze of lemon if there was one on the counter. Into a greased baking dish. Crushed crackers pressed across the top with a careful hand. A few small pats of butter placed over the crumbs. Into a 350-degree oven for 35 minutes. The cracker crust went golden and brittle on top. Underneath, the noodles had absorbed the cream sauce until the whole casserole held together in one tender, savory, deeply satisfying mass. The salmon distributed through every bite, subtle, never overwhelming, present in a way that felt almost elegant for something that cost so little. A can of salmon cost 29 cents in 1956. This fed 5 people on the most budget-constrained night of the week. Here's what most people forgot. Canned salmon is wild-caught Pacific salmon. Genuinely nutritious. Rich in protein and natural fats that sustain families through long working weeks. These Friday casseroles weren't deprivation. They were nourishment dressed in humility. Today a salmon dish at a decent restaurant costs $28 a plate. Your grandmother made essentially the same thing for under 60 cents. And her version bubbled. And browned. And filled the whole house with a smell that made Friday feel like something worth looking forward to. Not a sacrifice. A ritual. Number 15. Scalloped cabbage. We saved the most forgotten one for last. Not the most glamorous. Not the most obvious. But possibly, the most quietly brilliant dish on this entire list. Scalloped cabbage appeared on American tables during the leanest years of the 20th century. Depression kitchens. War rationing. Thin post-war budgets. Whenever money disappeared, cabbage remained. Cheap, filling, available year-round, and deeply misunderstood by everyone who never learned what a hot oven could do to it. She cut the cabbage into rough chunks, dropped into boiling salted water for just 3 minutes, barely blanched, still firm, then drained and layered into a buttered baking dish. Then the white sauce. Butter and flour cooked together until golden and nutty. Milk whisked in slowly until thick and smooth and fragrant. Sharp cheddar melted through. Salt, pepper, a pinch of dry mustard that most people never knew was in there. Poured over every layer of cabbage until the dish was full and heavy and promising. Breadcrumbs scattered across the top. A few pats of butter. Into a 375-degree oven for 30 minutes. What came out bore almost no resemblance to raw cabbage. The heat had transformed it completely. The sharp, aggressive bite of raw cabbage had softened into something sweet and yielding and almost nutty, each piece tender enough to cut with a fork, soaked through with cheese sauce, topped with a breadcrumb crust that shattered when the spoon broke through. A whole head of cabbage cost 9 cents in 1951. This fed 6 people for under 30 cents. Here's what those Depression-era grandmothers understood that we completely forgot. Cabbage contains natural sugars that caramelize under heat. The blanching removed bitterness. The long bacon cream sauce drew out a sweetness that made people who claimed to hate cabbage clean their plates in silence. Children didn't know they were eating budget food. They thought they were eating something special. And here's the truth. They were. These 15 casseroles weren't poverty food. They were proof. Proof that the women who stood in small kitchens on hard weeks, with nearly empty pantries and tired hands and families depending on them, possessed a kind of intelligence and dignity that no convenience food ever replaced. They wasted nothing. They complained about nothing. And they fed everyone. The recipes still work. The ingredients are still cheap. All that's missing is someone willing to remember. 15 casseroles. 15 times a mother stood in a small kitchen with almost nothing, and made enough. Not just enough food. Enough warmth. Enough comfort. Enough of something that made a hard week feel survivable and a simple table feel like the most important place in the world. We look back at the 1950s and see the struggle. The tight budgets. The long factory hours. The worn linoleum and the chipped baking dishes in the pantries that were never quite full enough. But the families who lived it? They remember the smell when the oven door opened. They remember the sound of a casserole bubbling on a cold evening. They remember cleaning their plates without being asked. They remember the feeling of sitting around a table where everyone was present, nobody distracted, nobody elsewhere, just together, in the warmth, eating something made by hands that loved them. No delivery app produces that. No frozen meal recreates it. No restaurant, at any price, has ever quite captured what it felt like to eat food made specifically for you, by someone who needed it to be enough. It always was. These recipes didn't disappear because something better came along. They disappeared because the world got faster, and louder, and more convenient. And somewhere in all that speed and noise, the quiet wisdom of a woman standing at a hot stove, stretching ingredients, layering flavors, feeding people with dignity and almost nothing, got left behind. But it isn't gone. It's on the index card in the kitchen drawer. It's in the handwriting you still recognize. It's in the dish your grandmother made that you've never quite been able to stop thinking about. Make it this week. Turn the oven on. Slice the potatoes thin. Let the cheese brown at the edges. Fill the kitchen with that smell. And remember what food was always supposed to be. Not convenience. Not content. Not a transaction. Just love. Made edible.